What if the way your dog eats is telling you everything you've been missing about their behavior? Welcome to The Dog Who Asked for More, the podcast for dog parents navigating real life behavior struggles, reactivity, anxiety, and all of the hard parts no one prepares you for. Each week, you'll get training, enrichment, and nutrition strategies through honest, grounded conversations that help you understand your dog, support their needs, and build the bond you've always dreamed of. I'm Em, and in this episode, you'll learn how mealtime behavior is one of the clearest windows into what your dog actually needs, why traditional bowls can accidentally increase frustration, anxiety, or overstimulation, and how changing how you feed, not what you feed, can bring more calm, confidence, and connection to your daily routine. Carol, would you tell me about the moment that made you realize dogs needed something different from a traditional bowl, asking for more at mealtime?
Absolutely. We used to have a little Havanese named Pip who would inhale her food in about 30 seconds and let out the most horrendous belch. I couldn't have people around. They'd have tears streaming down their eyes. This little 14-pound dog just let it out. And one day I was making chicken breasts and my daughter said, "Mom, put it down for all the scraps and juices for Pip." Put it down, and I saw entirely different eating behavior. And that's when I realized, what am I doing to my pet? She used to scarf it down so quickly, and I saw different behavior. Then I realized I really had to go and explore how wolves eat in the wild because our dogs, the closest living relative, is the gray wolf. I knew we needed to understand more about instinctively who they were.
Many pet parents don't realize that things like rushing, gulping, guarding, or pacing at mealtime are actually stress signals. What behaviors do you wish more pet parents recognize in their dog at mealtime?
That's a really great question. Our dogs communicate to us all the time. And one of the things I tell pet parents is observe your dog, see what they're doing. If they're not eating at a very relaxed pace where they're moving around and enjoying their food, there's something wrong with the way that you're feeding them. If you see a stressful behavior, such as very rigid, gulping behavior, that means they're experiencing fear. They're afraid somebody's going to come in and take their food. So they're just gulping it down. But Emily, the one thing I want to share with people is if your dog is gulping their food down, they are not getting the nutritional advantage of that food. And the reason is cortisol increases in their system, which suppresses nutrient absorption. So that means while you're spending all this great money for food, your dog is not absorbing it. The other reason is that when you allow them to eat too much food at too fast a pace, it overwhelms the small intestine, and there's not enough time for the digestive enzymes to come in and decompose it for nutrient absorption. So it's very critical. You have to have a dog who is enjoying their mealtime, much like we do. Any other behavior is saying, I'm stressed. And one thing I'd like to share with parents, and this is something that I've discovered over the last 6 months, we had a lot of people calling in about, my dog won't eat. He's sitting there and he's putting his paw up in the air, and I don't know what to do. What we found out is that behavior is called air-bearing food. And the dog is communicating, I don't feel this is a safe environment. These are dogs where their sensory circuit is saying there's danger, something's not safe, something's wrong. They're communicating, I need a different feeding environment.
That's very cool. And I agree with you on dogs being able to enjoy their meals the way that we do. Something that I have really experienced in the last year switching Fitz over to raw feeding is going from a dog who would literally just walk away from the food bowl because he wasn't interested, or at least that's what I thought, he wasn't interested. And then now having a dog who walks around his platter and chews everything up and is totally fine just doing his thing, and he licks up every last little drop. Watching him enjoy his food is so satisfying and makes me feel so good about the decisions that I have made for him. And then I have Toby, who's the exact opposite, which, again, to your point, dog who inhales everything like super fast, but then 5 minutes later is hungry again because he's not getting the benefits of his meal because he's just, it's gone. And it's these little tiny things that make a really big difference for dog, and that's why we need to talk about them. Talk about why some dogs struggle with bowls, especially reactive, anxious, overstimulated, or sensory sensitive dogs.
It's really very simple. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is we're the ones who change their feeding ecology. They used to engage in carcass feeding. They had complete control over the carcass and made food decisions on themselves. What happened is over time, they went from that to scattered feeding when they started to come in closer to settlements. And then all of a sudden, we switched them to a bowl. Interestingly, Emily, there is no study that goes into any examination of the type of feeder that best suits dogs. There is no research out there. And it's sort of mind boggling because we've researched things that are important to us, right? The feeder has been totally overlooked. So the bowl, you're asking your dog to put their head into a hole, which blocks their periphery vision. And because the food is piled high, they can't really sniff anything out. And this is one thing I'd like pet parents to realize. Pets see the world through their nose. They have up to 300 million sense sites in their nose. Their taste buds are very limited. They have 1,700 taste buds versus our 9,000. So they literally taste their food through their sense of smell. So by putting it in a bowl, you're absolutely inhibiting them from engaging with their food, which is why many of them gulp it down. Then the worst places to feed your dog is in the kitchen corner. And I, like everybody else, this is the most common thing to do. It's closest in the kitchen. You put the dog out of the way. Well, when you're feeding from a bowl, the sides of the bowl are blocking their peripheral vision. Then the walls are blocking their peripheral vision. They're dipping down into the bowl. Their eyes, for most animals, are set at a 20-degree angle. So all they're getting is a blocked vision. But then their sense of hearing is also very powerful. They can hear over a mile away, and they hear at much higher frequencies than we do. So what you don't realize is their vision is blocked, but then they're hearing all these noises in the background, which aren't audible to us. So we've created a very frightening situation, which is why a lot of dogs will either gulp their food, dump it out of the bowl so they can position it where they can get more sensory input, or they take it to a place which is a safer location. All of those behaviors indicate their sensory circuit is warning them. They are blessed to have this sensory circuit. This is how they survived in the wild. But what we've done is say, your senses aren't important to us. We're going to feed you what's most convenient. So that's why bowl feeding does nothing to help the pet, really.
That's really interesting. It's something that is so overlooked. We sell dog bowls everywhere, all over the internet and pet stores, everything. It has become the norm. But again, like you said, no research on it. So, of course, nobody knows that this is actually probably part of the reason that their dog is suffering through meals. Let's talk about how using a Mind Pet platter and spreading food across a flat surface changes the emotional experience during meals.
Sure. Well, basically, what the pet platter resembles is a carcass. The size of it is specifically designed to make the pet feel comfortable it gives them 360-degree views and movement. Because even in the wild, after they killed their prey, they would circle in both directions to make sure no other animal could come and steal their food resource. By spreading the food all around, and if you feed raw, you can put eggs, different proteins, all sorts of different piles to almost resemble a carcass like experience where the dog uses a sense of smell, stimulating his brain to make actual food choices. And this is what we want our pets to do. They spent over 95% of their time in the wild scavenging, hunting, looking for prey, deconstructing carcasses, all those things. By putting it into a bowl, we've stripped them of one of the most important times of their eating behavior. So actually, we're letting them be who they really are, those little wolves, by having a territory to explore like that. Then the scoops here resemble the ends of bones, and that promotes positive licking, which releases endorphins, which are both rewarding and relaxing. So again, we're tapping into that instinctive behavior. The ridges resemble the rib cages where you can shove food in and different elements where they have to dig it out and explore. So this really engages the sensory circuit. But one of the things we've discovered is we tried to do this from the dog's perspective. The pet platter is designed based on the science of who dogs are. You have to be concerned. There are lick type mats that are out there, and they're designed to inhibit eating. Because again, it's from a human perspective. The way I can slow a dog down is by making these little corners and grooves where they can't get to it. But in our research, what we found is that that promotes negative licking. It becomes obsessive compulsive because the dog is trying to get to the food with those up to 300 million sense sites. They're smelling the food, but they can't get to it, which then increases aggressive behavior. So the one thing about the pet platter is that it is specifically designed so the dog's tongue, and yes, we did measure tongues, okay? The dog's tongue can fit and get every particle of food absolutely everywhere on the platter. So it leads to meal satisfaction versus meal frustration. And that's a critical thing. You want your dog to be satisfied, calm, and relaxed by the time they finish their meal. And if your dog isn't doing that, then you know there's a problem with the feeding territory.
We have been using the Mind Pet Platter, let me think here for a second, since March of 2025. So by the time this episode releases, almost a year we'll have been using the Mind Pet Platter, and I don't use anything else. I have a water bowl, obviously, but we don't use anything else for food. There are so many benefits that I have seen from the Mind Pet Platter and the freedom of eating. First of all, we switched to raw diets in this household. Fitz became a not picky eater anymore. He actually enjoyed his food. And what you mentioned earlier about how spreading it out and letting them be able to kind of sift through it and choose, he does. He picks what he wants to eat first. He'll push things aside so he can save them for later. And he will lick every tiny little piece of bone and blood and goat yogurt or egg or whatever it is that we've got mixed up in there. All of it will be gone. And this is a dog who never finished a bowl of food before, who never got excited about eating before. And then the best part is that afterwards, he will go and lay down and take a nap. And for a
Oh,
dog that
that's
is
great.
yeah, and for a dog that is high energy, busybody, wants to play all of the time, the thing that you want them to do after they eat that meal is the same thing like Thanksgiving for us. You want to rest, you want to digest, you want to let your body soak up all those nutrients because you don't want to go play outside with your dog right after they ate, not unless you want bloat and potentially to lose your dog from that. So giving them the ability to deconstruct the meal and then lick their little feelings away really, really brings a full circle effect for them. And it's such a cool experience. And then I have the opposite dog in Toby because he was like inhale. The whole bowl was gone in 2 seconds. And he wasn't benefiting from the nutrients. He wasn't digesting things. He was hungry. But when we put it on the Mind Pet platter and I spread it all out, he has to slow down, and he does the same thing. He licks all of the grooves, he licks it out of the little river, he gets every last little bit of it, and he will finish, and he'll walk away and tell me that he's finished, and then he'll go back and make sure that he got all of it. It cracks me up.
The great thing about the pet platter is that pets actually bond with it. They look at it as their personal feeding territory. So we have a lot of our pet parents who send pictures of their dogs sleeping by it, putting their paw on it, napping there, visiting it during the day. I mean, this is the one thing we can give them that's actually theirs, that they can own and control. And that's why with rescues and things of that sort, they get the pet platter and the pet platter goes home with them to their new forever home. And it helps the transition. It reduces the anxiety of being in a new environment because they're going there with their friend.
I
So
love that.
it's a really big help. But you mentioned something, and I do want to address this. Fast eating is probably the number one issue that pet parents have. We get these questions all the time. I do want to leave your listeners with one very important thing. Honor thy dog's nose. Okay. A lot of the slow feeders today, again, designed from a human perspective versus a dog's perspective, hits into their noses with projectiles. The exterior of the nose has sensory nerve endings, which are very sensitive. So you never want to have anything poking into your dog's nose. But more importantly, with constant pounding against something, the mucous membrane on the interior of the nasal cavity begins to swell, and that becomes painful. But if it continually hits, because some of these slow feeders are so difficult, the nose is constantly hitting, food flies up in there and then it dries out the nasal cavity and they can't smell them. So again, if you observe your dog with the feeder that you're currently using, is that dog kind of getting frustrated with, things hitting into its nose? Do they try to tip it? Do they try to sway it? Always observe your dog because they always communicate while they're eating, and it'll give you clues into what you need to have done.
That's a really great piece of advice. A lot of people don't realize that some of the slow feeders, some of the enrichment puzzles and things like that, depending on the dog, every dog is different. Every dog is going to have a different sensitivity level. And so we need to really make sure that we're observing how the dog is reacting. If the dog
Exactly.
is not interested, if the dog's walking away, like you said, if the dog's knocking it over, things like that, it might be too hard. It might be causing pain. They might be losing sense of smell because of it. These are all really, really valid things that we need to be watching for.
It's also interesting, finicky eating. I think that's the number two issue. We hear that a lot. Finicky eaters, typically from a psychological perspective, are experiencing fear in their eating territory. And we had this one woman at an event that we were at who had a little tiny dog, and she was feeding him by hand for 8 years, okay? And she came up to our booth and said, "There is no way that your platter is gonna help my finicky dog. He will only eat out of my hand." So we gave her a pet platter to take, said, "You don't have to buy it, just take it, try it, and come back and let us know how you feel about it." She came back and she said, "Damn you guys." So what we discovered is that the bowl she was feeding from and where she was feeding him from was heightening the anxiety so high that the pet was experiencing fear reduction when eating from somebody's hand because it was open, they could see what was going on, and the trauma of the feeding environment was taken away. So finicky eaters definitely change behavior with the pet platter because we're allowing them to use their sensory experience like they were created in a positive way to make eating enjoyable again.
Tell me the thing that surprised you the most when you started observing dogs eating from the platter instead of the bowl.
That's interesting. Actually, I think I first came to a realization of how we were not listening to our pets by actually watching wolves deconstruct carcasses. And for some of your listeners, a lot of the zoos in the country will do carcass feedings at the zoo so you can observe them. You will be amazed at how highly interactive and involved the whole deconstruction process is on a carcass. The paws, the body position, how they select. I've seen some wolves where they will literally eat organ meat right away. I've seen others where they line it up in the snow and then they'll eat whatever they need and the decisions they make. No wolf eats exactly alike, just like no dog eats alike, but it is a very highly interactive, stimulating experience. So when I saw that, I said, we have to recreate this. What we're doing, we're stifling. We're saying, here, eat from this fast food container. And it's like us when we eat from a fast food container, we typically eat very fast and we're still hungry after we eat out of it. Dogs are experiencing that same thing. When they gobble their food, they typically lay down right by the bowl and say, what's next? There's no meal satisfaction. So the greatest gift you can give your pet is that meal satisfaction, a stimulating experience. And it's just a joy to see them move around the pet platter, making food decisions, licking, making food choices. But more importantly, when they're done with that meal, like you said, this was a good thing, Mom. And it also allows you to bond more with your pet. Pet parents have written back to us saying, I've gotten more involved in creating meals. It's almost like a charcuterie board and the pet sees you preparing these meals, and it really is a bonding experience. And I think that's one of the things that pet parents often overlook is, oh, just pour it in a bowl, put it down. You can create a very positive experience with your pet through that.
Honestly, that's one of my favorite parts. Meal prep for 28 days at a time. So everything's in a Pyrex dish and I pull them out of the freezer and thaw them out. When I get the dishes out of the refrigerator and the goat yogurt and the eggs and I start lining everything up on the counter, make like a little assembly line. First we smear this and then we spread this and all the things and then we put an egg on the top. Both of my dogs just sit there and get so excited, and Fitz will be drooling by the time it's over, and they both know. Toby knows that his platter is gonna go out on the porch, and he's gonna go out there and eat in the middle of the porch, and Fitz is gonna go on the middle of the floor in the kitchen, and the reason that they go to those 2 different areas is because Toby is not messy. He still very much takes all of it right off of the plate, just kind of eats it as quickly as he can still because that's how he is. But then there's Fitz who comes in the kitchen because it's a linoleum floor and I need to be able to clean it because he will push things off of the plate to get to what he wants to get to. And then he'll go back and walk around and
Yeah.
eat all of the other stuff. Toby doesn't push things off the plate. So he can be on the porch and I don't have to worry about the floor being as clean out there. But the kitchen floor has to be clean. That's why it's very important to think about where you're going to do this, no matter what you're feeding, because they are going to push things off. They are going to lick the entire platter. There's going to be slobber and food ingredients everywhere.
Different dogs have different eating styles, and there are some that will push it off simply because this is the way they're deconstructing their carcass. Like I said, some line up the organ meat totally away from the carcass itself. Why they do that, we don't know. But it's important to let them have that interaction with the food. This is how they are designed. And another thing is dogs should be eating over versus into. Their body should be convex instead of concave for proper digestion. When they're scooping food out of the bowl, it's coagulating in the throat, which leads to more choking, regurgitation, and things of that sort. So look at the position that they're in. It should be a very natural And I know there's a big debate about elevated feeding. And I've told people that probably up until about 4 years ago, the debate was 50-50 between veterinarians whether you feed elevated or not. I see that conversation shifting to not feeding in an elevated positioning. And I think part of the reason for that is when we really explore how wolves eat in the wild, they always eat over the carcass and pull up. I've never seen a wolf elevate their carcass and eat it at a higher range. And I would recommend for anybody who is feeding elevated to look into, I need to be doing this or not. There is a Purdue University study that was done among large and giant breeds, and they found that elevated feeding actually increases the probability of bloat 20% among large dogs and 52% among giant breeds. And people may ask, why is that? Well, when you bring up the bowl higher, it allows them to use their lower jaw to push more food against the side of the bowl, which acts as a backward conveyor. So they're shoveling more food and air in than if they were eating over their meal. Obviously, there are situations, though, where spine issues, neck issues, missing cushions between fur, there are reasons for doing it. But it's something pet parents should look into. Talk to your vet about it. Make sure that if you are feeding elevated, is this good for my pet?
For the person listening, give them some simple steps that they can start today to transition their pet to platter eating. Obviously, they're not going to have the mind platter today, but give them some steps so that they can transition to using it.
What you can do is to use some sort of flat surface. Do not use any sort of cookie sheet or anything because the reflections and the shine, they have more rods than cones, so they're really sensitive to motion detection. So the reflection can actually spook them. But get some sort of flat plate that can lay absolutely flat on the floor and just start out by creating little piles of food that they can pick up, but also make sure they can move around it. And that's a great way to start out and then to transition to something that will promote licking and exploring a little bit more. But just sort of a large plate that is safe to use and lies flat on the floor.
And what would be some common mistakes that people should avoid when using the platter style?
You have to be careful that the dog isn't allowed to shovel the food all in one area. You want to make sure that it is spread out so there can be more exploration. Otherwise, they're just going to turn into gulping behavior. And if you're using some sort of flat surface, initially just make sure there's some sort of little towel or something underneath to limit the amount of movement that's going to take place just for the safety of the dog.
Before we dive into the wrap up, I always take a moment for something that we call answering the ask. Can you share a moment where a dog's mealtime behavior was actually an ask? Something they needed from you and how you showed up differently once you understood what they were saying?
It was with my own dog where I used to feed kibble, and I saw her approaching the bowl and not showing much interest, and eating became perfunctory. When you get them as puppies, you see that interest and that excitement. And all of a sudden, I saw a very mundane experience. And I thought, you know what? There's something wrong with this. And that's where I ventured also into raw feeding and then the whole notion of the pet platter. So those things kind of came together simultaneously. And that's why we talk about it's not only what you feed your pet, but also how you feed them. Those are intricately linked. And once you bring those two elements together, you're providing your dog the most natural feeding experience that optimizes their enjoyment. But again,
Love that.
It was just by looking at my dog saying, "Why aren't they excited anymore? Why is there no interest?" It's just, maybe ate a little bit and then left and would come back, and I'd go, "This isn't my dog." And then when I switched to raw feeding, oh my God, oh my God. And then we started exploring different proteins and just the enthusiasm. And she'd be sitting there going, "What's today, Mom? What are you going to feed me?" And you just sense that excitement. So, again, the most important thing I can leave your audience with is pay attention to your dog while they're eating. They're communicating each and every time they eat. We have to make sure that we push our perception of feeding away and we're delivering to their needs. And you're going to have one happy dog on your hands and a healthy dog.
For our final segment, we're going to do what I call the bowl boost. And as our wrap up, I'd love for you to share one simple nutrition or feeding presentation tip, something the person listening can try today to help their dog feel calmer, safer, or more supported at mealtime.
One of the things is I volunteer at zoos. We work with a lot of different animals. Food monotony. Food monotony is when you typically are serving the same food over and over again, or just a few foods. This is common across all species. If you feed the same thing over and over again, they'll just stop eating. This is true among seals, among polar bears. I encourage everybody to see what nutritional things can we do, like adding an egg. Eggs are a great nutritional resource for animals. Cracking that first egg on there, and even duck eggs, which are also highly nutritious, all of those sorts of things just can create a whole different experience, but you're providing more nutrition to your dog as well. That's what I would recommend.
Love it. Eggs are big at this house. They're one of the favorites. It's also really fun to watch a dog eat a raw egg because they're slimy and they're slippery, and your dog really has to kind of work to get the whole thing. So it's definitely an enjoyable moment and really, really great and enjoyable nutritionally for them too. My final question for you is, what would you like to leave our listener with today? It doesn't have to be on topic. It can be any message that would help them with the dog in their life.
Okay, I'm going to go a little off topic. As you know, I'm a psychologist. I am always very aware of what's going on in the field of psychology and how it relates to our experience with our own pets. And this is something that I talked about at the Feed Real Summit. The cell phone has overtaken everybody's lives. We are constantly connected. I live in the city of Chicago, where I see people walking their dogs, but being on the cell phone the whole time. And the dog is turning around saying, "Are you paying attention to me?" One of the things we found, some of the more recent studies, is that the cell phone is actually negatively impacting the bonding between mothers and young children, because instead of interacting with them while on walks and being outside, parents are on the cell phone. So what I would recommend is your dog will love you even more if you put down the cell phone on walks and engage in their experience in the outdoors, because they want to share it with you. And you will find a greater bond building between you and your dog.
I absolutely love that. That's an excellent message. Today, we explored the idea that mealtime isn't just about nutrition, it's about communication. Your dog's pacing, gulping, slowing down, freezing, guarding, or wandering aren't quirks, they are signals. And when you change how you feed, you change how your dog feels. Carol showed us that our dogs aren't just asking for more food, they're asking for a better feeding experience that meets emotional and sensory needs. So, be kind, spread joy, and remember, mealtime is a conversation, not a race. Thanks for listening to The Dog Who Asks for More. If feeding your dog feels stressful, confusing, or like you're constantly second guessing yourself, you are not alone. I work with so many dog parents who feel stuck at mealtime, all worried that they're getting it wrong. That's why I created the Mini Bowl Blueprint, a free, simple guide with 3 realistic swaps that you can make right now to support digestion, reduce overwhelm, and bring more calm and confidence back into feeding. You'll find the link in the episode description. Go grab your copy and start making mealtime easier today. New episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'll see you next time.